I finally finished all 5 of these fucking books so I can film this video. I feel like I have not known peace since I decided I wanted to do this. If this is the first time you're seeing my face, hi, I'm Paige, and I am currently trying to read all 241 of the unread books I had at the start of the year. I decided to do this challenge because a friend of mine sent a TikTok over where this person was making assumptions about whether celebrities had actually read the books they've recommended or not. And I noticed some of the books on like the slides that she was using were books that I had on my shelf for my challenge. So I was like, you know what? Why don't I do a week where I just read what celebs have read and see what their tastes are like? So I found the original account that girl used to find the celeb reads to make her assumptions. And I took a couple screenshots of books that I had that I felt would be fine to read in 1 week. I was wrong. It took me like 3 weeks to finish these 3 books among other ones. So we're here to talk about that. So first up we have Selena Gomez, and the book that I chose from her slide was Becoming by Michelle Obama. The Light We Carry was one of the first books that I read in 2023 because of work, and I really enjoyed that one, surprisingly. I had tried to read Becoming before. I got about, I think, 100 pages in, and I wasn't really clicking with it. I was kind of curious to return to the book to see if after reading The Light We Carry I gelled with her narrative voice better, and I will say while I didn't hate it, I do still think The Light We Carry is a better book, but that's probably because it just aligns with my interests more. Becoming is a straight memoir. It is about Michelle's life. It chronicles her childhood all the way up to when she leaves the White House in 2016, and The Light We Carry is more in the self-help category where she's taking specific moments of her life and like the lessons she learned from them and how you can apply those lessons to your life. And I'm not really a self-help reading girly, but it was the hopefulness that was present in The Light We Carry that I really enjoyed, I think, specifically after the past couple years. And I found myself frustrated sometimes reading Becoming because just like with her and her husband's politics when they were in the White House, it felt very pandering toward the white gaze in a way that just, for me personally, is really frustrating and annoying to read sometimes. This is one of the books where when I went back, because by the time I finished these books, I forgot who had read what. And when I saw it was Selena Gomez that had suggested this one, I was like, that makes complete sense. Selena and Michelle, I feel like the self-branding, like the images they put out into the world are very wholesome and very similar in messaging. So I felt like this was a very safe choice for Selena Gomez to say that she'd read in an interview because it's not really gonna like stir anything in terms of her audience. But ultimately, if you have to choose between the two, go with The Light We Carry. The second book that I read for this challenge was apparently one that Phoebe Bridgers mentioned, and that is The Idiot. I was completely surprised by how much I enjoyed this book. Honestly, I didn't even read the synopsis going into it. I had it on my shelf for work purposes. I took a photo of that book with the author's second novel. I think not knowing what I was reading going into it sort of works in my favor because I might have gone into it with expectations based on the synopsis that wouldn't have been met just because of the emphasis that's placed on her time in college versus her time in Hungary. The Idiot is set in the late 90s and it follows Celine, a new Harvard freshman who ends up falling for this guy in one of her classes, and she follows him to Hungary to teach English in the countryside. I highly recommend listening to the audiobook for this one. I think this is one of the rare cases where the audiobook actually enhances the reading experience, specifically because of Celine's voice in this book. It's very, very dry, very monotonous, and hearing someone deliver these outrageous lines in just a deadpan tone just increases like the humor of the situation, and it shocked me to the point of laughing out loud so many times. I complained a lot about My Year of Rest and Relaxation on TikTok recently, and I think it's because I read that one after reading The Idiot, and some of the things I got out of The Idiot I had been expecting out of My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Like, this was a completely satirical look at a privileged college student, and it was very self-aware of the perspective that it had chosen to tell the story in, and that informed the story itself, versus My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which it just felt lacked some of the nuance and some of the self-awareness that I had been anticipating going into it. And maybe that was on me for anticipating that at all going into this book, but I thought that was why it was popular. When I saw this was Phoebe Bridgers who read this one, I also thought that this made sense honorifically. She's critical about the world around her, similar to how this book is very critical of this specific lens, and once again Miss Bridgers has not let me down, so I would take another book recommendation from her. So the third book I read for this challenge was My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which was on the Gwendoline Christie slide. This book follows a young, pretty blonde girl and her struggle with mental illness and the choice she makes to spend a year hibernating, basically, to wake up refreshed and ready to live again. Arguably similar to Elif, Moshfegh chose this character as the lens through which she tells the story in order to make a point about these very privileged perspectives, but I don't really think she had much to say about it, or at least I felt like that in the book, and it didn't feel as groundbreaking as the hype was making it out to be. Specifically the end, where she does eventually hibernate for a couple months and ends up waking up refreshed and wanting to live again, that felt very unsatisfying to read. There's a difference between writing an unlikable character and writing a character that's uninteresting to read about. I think people just made an aesthetic out of this book, which I also have a problem with, because there's nothing to glamorize about being mentally ill and taking too many pills and like sleeping your life away because you're depressed. Like, I was very surprised that this book was recommended by Gwendoline Christie when I returned to the original screenshots. It is definitely along the lines of like, these are edgy, on the pulse point of the culture kind of read. Like a white feminist would definitely think this book is making more points than it actually is making. Okay, we're on to the fourth book that I read for this Reading Like Celebrities challenge, and that is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. This was recommended by Andrew Garfield, or like mentioned in one of his interviews at some point. On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous is a series of letters written from a son to his mother who cannot read, when the son has grown up and has that self-reflective perspective to put on his childhood. It felt like such a love letter to the women in his family in terms of the empathy with the way he viewed their lives, at least with this like self-reflective stance and being older and understanding the trauma that they actually also experienced, which would have led to the behavior that they had in his childhood. It did take me the longest to read this book simply because of the emotional baggage that comes with reading it. Central to the story is this inability to connect between the mother and son, and it's also reflected in the choice to write these letters in English because his mother doesn't understand the language as well. So like, there is an inability for him to truly express what he's been through to his mother. It was compelling and it felt so honest, and it was very, very hard to read because, like I mentioned, because of those two things. I went into it knowing that I was just going to be hurt by what I was reading no matter how short of a time I had to dive into the book. This kind of book, being Andrew Garfield's taste, makes complete sense to me. He is very in tune with his emotions from like what he puts off in the interviews, and so I completely was like, of course this is the kind of book that he would want to read and recommend to everyone, but I will never take another recommendation from him again because I simply do not have the capacity. Now for the fifth and final book that I read for this Reading Like Celebrity challenge. The Course of Love was recommended by Harry Styles, which 100% tracks. I don't even need to say more than he recommended this book, and of course this was the kind of book he would recommend. This book follows a couple from the moment they meet throughout the course of their relationship, from marriage to having kids to infidelity to going to therapy to work on their issues. But I would argue that this is the author's treatise on what he believes love is. I wasn't really here for the story itself. It was more so to see how the author was going to explore the specific stage of the relationship that we were just in. The primary argument of this like novel slash treatise on love is that the author believes that as a society we overemphasize the romanticism in initial moments of love when you're excited, versus true love, which he believes is the day-to-day, is the work of learning to appreciate the flaws in a partner and loving them in spite of these flaws, no matter how you butt heads because of it. I enjoyed the way the author framed them making the choice to actively work on the relationship. I feel like that's something that we don't really see when we're reading about romance. The little inserted essay clips in these books, which are basically the author talking to us and telling us what is happening, what these characters are thinking, what trauma has caused these reactions, etc., etc. They're not going to be for everyone, and I will admit they ran a little long, especially toward the end, and there isn't room for nuance for you to come to your own conclusions in terms of what's happening with the couple. I will say the author cannot write a woman to save his life. Kirsten had a lot less nuance in her. I feel like Kirsten was a lot less fleshed out, but I was mainly here for the philosophical approach to the book, and I enjoyed that aspect of it. I went into reading The Course of Love ready to be a hater. I was ready to be like, this is pretentious as fuck, and it is pretentious as fuck. I will not lie, it's pretentious. Just like with his music, Daddy Styles did something interesting. Some of his other book choices that were on that slide felt kind of rogue, so I don't think that I generally would trust his taste. Those were the 5 books that I read that celebrities recommended or mentioned in interviews. It was an interesting experience. No, I will never be doing this again. Honestly, I will not be going to celebrities for my reading recommendations. You guys should let me know if you've read any of these books in the comments and what your thoughts were on them. I will be back at some point with another video, I'm sure, and until then, happy reading.